Why Thai people rarely say no directly. A sleep story and cultural discovery through Thailand. Chapter 1. The word I could never hear. Before I came to Thailand, I believed something very simple. If someone wanted to say no, they would simply say no. That was how communication worked where I came from. A clear answer was considered an honest answer. A direct answer was considered a respectful answer. And anything else felt confusing. At least, that was what I thought. My name is Daniel. I am a travel writer from England. Several years ago, I arrived in Thailand intending to stay for 3 weeks. 3 weeks eventually became 6 months. And one small word, or rather, the absence of one small word, became one of the greatest cultural mysteries I had ever encountered. The mystery was this: why did nobody seem willing to say no? Not directly, not clearly, not in the way I expected. The first time I noticed it happened in Bangkok. It was early evening. The rainy season had just begun. The city glowed beneath clouds the color of charcoal. Streetlights reflected across wet pavement. Motorcycles hummed through narrow lanes. The smell of grilled pork drifted through the humid air. I had been staying in a small guest house near the old part of the city. The owner was a cheerful woman named Pim. Every morning, she smiled warmly. Every evening, she greeted guests as though they were old friends returning home. One afternoon, I approached the front desk. "I need a taxi to the train station tomorrow morning at 6, I said. She smiled. Maybe. The word seemed harmless enough. Maybe? I asked. Yes, she said. Maybe. I waited for more explanation. None arrived. The next morning at 6, a taxi appeared exactly on time. Not 6:05. Not 6 to 10. Exactly 6. I thanked Pim before leaving. "You knew the taxi would come?" She smiled. "Yes." I laughed. "Then why did you say maybe?" Pim laughed too. A soft laugh. The kind that seemed to contain a secret. Maybe sounds nicer. That answer somehow confused me even more. Over the next few weeks, the same thing happened again and again. I asked whether a restaurant was open late. Maybe. It remained open until midnight. I asked whether a bus would arrive soon. Maybe. It arrived 3 minutes later. I asked whether someone could help me find a local market. Maybe. 10 minutes later, they personally walked me there. Everything seemed wrapped inside uncertainty. Yet somehow everything worked. Thailand felt like a country where people communicated through invisible meanings hidden beneath ordinary words, and I could not understand any of them. One evening, I sat beside the Chao Phraya River. Rain had just finished falling. The river moved slowly through the darkness. Long-tailed boats drifted beneath bridges. Temple lights shimmered on the water. Across the river, the golden spires of Waterun glowed softly against the night sky. I opened my notebook. Under today's date, I wrote, "Question: why don't Thai people say no?" A simple question, but one that would take months to answer. The answer began several weeks later, far away from Bangkok, far away from tourists, far away from guidebooks. It began in a small village in northern Thailand, a place where the nights were quiet enough to hear insects singing across rice fields, a place where old traditions still moved gently beneath everyday life. A place where an elderly schoolteacher named Somchai would slowly help me understand something I had never considered before. Not every culture views communication the same way, and not every culture believes honesty must always sound direct. The village sat among rolling green hills. The road leading there twisted through forests and farmland. Mist drifted above the fields every morning. By evening, the mountains became silhouettes against pink and purple skies. I rented a small wooden room beside a rice farm. Every night, I slept beneath the sound of frogs and distant crickets. The pace of life felt different here. Slower, gentler, almost dreamlike. The village school stood near the center of town. That was where I first met Somchai. He had retired years earlier but still visited regularly. Children adored him. Shopkeepers greeted him respectfully. Everyone seemed to know him. He moved slowly, spoke softly, and smiled often. One afternoon, we sat beneath a large tamarind tree. The air smelled faintly of wet earth after a brief rain shower. Nearby, children played football. Their laughter floated across the field I decided to ask my question. Can I ask you something strange? Somchai smiled. Of course. Why don't Thai people say no? His eyes immediately sparkled, as though he had heard the question many times before. Ah, he said, the famous question. I laughed. So foreigners ask this often? Very often. And what is the answer? He leaned back slightly. The leaves above us rustled in the wind. For several moments, he remained silent. Then he said, perhaps first I should ask you something. Okay, in England, if someone asks for help and you cannot help them, what do you say? No. Directly? Usually. And that is polite? Yes. He nodded thoughtfully. Interesting. Then he pointed toward the football field. A boy had just missed a goal. His friends immediately encouraged him. Nobody criticized him. Nobody mocked him. They simply smiled and continued playing. Somchai watched quietly. Then he turned back toward me. In Thailand, he said, many people grow up learning something very important. What? He spoke slowly. As children, we are often taught not only to protect our own feelings. He paused. We are also taught to protect other people's feelings. The sentence seemed simple, yet something about it felt important. I wrote it down immediately. Protect other people's feelings. The old teacher nodded. Sometimes saying no directly can create discomfort, even when the answer is honestly no. Yes, I frowned. Why? He smiled. Because communication is not only about information. I stared at him. He continued. Communication is also about relationships. The wind moved gently through the rice fields. Children shouted happily in the distance. A bird landed briefly on a nearby fence. For the first time, I began wondering whether I had been asking the wrong question. Perhaps the mystery wasn't why Thai people avoided saying no. Perhaps the mystery was why I expected everyone to value directness in the same way I did. And perhaps those two things were not identical. As evening approached, Somchai stood. We will continue tomorrow. Tomorrow? Understanding Thailand takes time. He smiled warmly. And besides, this story is much bigger than one word. The sun disappeared behind distant hills. The village slowly settled into evening. Smoke rose from outdoor kitchens. The scent of garlic and chili drifted through the cooling air. Motorbikes returned home. Dogs barked softly. Lights appeared one by one among the houses. I walked back to my room carrying my notebook. The frogs had already begun their nightly chorus. The sky deepened into indigo. And for the first time since arriving in Thailand, I suspected the answer to my question might be far more beautiful than I had imagined. Not because Thai people disliked saying no, not because they were avoiding honesty, but because they were often trying to preserve something else, something invisible, something delicate, something that mattered deeply, human harmony. And as the sounds of the village drifted gently through the night, I realized I had only just begun to understand. Chapter 2: The Day I Learned About Saving Face. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. For a few moments, I lay quietly beneath the mosquito net, listening. The village was still half asleep. A rooster crowed somewhere beyond the rice fields. Leaves rustled softly outside my window. In the distance, I could hear the faint hum of a motorcycle starting its day. The air felt cool and fresh, carrying the scent of damp earth from the previous night's rain. Unlike Bangkok, mornings here seemed to arrive slowly. Nothing rushed. Nothing demanded attention. The day unfolded gently, like a flower opening to the sunlight. I dressed and stepped outside. Mist hovered above the rice fields. The mountains beyond the village looked soft and blue beneath the early morning light. Farmers were already walking toward their fields. Some carried baskets, others carried tools balanced across their shoulders. Many greeted me with smiles. Good morning, Sawasdee Krub. I returned the greetings as best I could. One thing I had already noticed about Thailand was that friendliness often appeared before familiarity. People did not need to know you well to treat you kindly. As I walked toward the village market, I spotted Somchai sitting beneath a small wooden shelter beside the road. A steaming cup of coffee rested on the table before him. He waved me over. Daniel, good morning. Come sit. I joined him. The coffee smelled rich and slightly sweet. Nearby, an elderly woman sold grilled bananas. The smoke drifted lazily through the cool morning air. For several minutes, we simply watched the village wake up. Then Somchai turned toward me. Do you still want to know why Thai people do not say no directly? I laughed. Very much. He nodded. Today, I will tell you about something important. What is it? He thought carefully before answering. In English, people often call it saving face. I had heard the phrase before, but only vaguely. Saving face? Yes. He picked up his coffee cup. In Thailand, many people try to avoid embarrassing others. I consider this. That sounds reasonable. It goes further than you think. He smiled gently. We often try to avoid embarrassing ourselves too. The village road slowly became busier. Children rode bicycles past us. A dog wandered lazily across the street. The world seemed wonderfully unhurried. Somchai pointed toward two men unloading vegetables from a truck. Imagine one of those men asked the other for help. Okay, the other man cannot help. I nodded. In your country, he may simply say no. Usually, and nobody feels bad. Generally. Somchai smiled. In Thailand, some people worry that a direct no may create discomfort. Discomfort? Yes. He paused. Maybe the person asking loses face because he has been rejected. I thought about that. Or maybe the person refusing feels rude. Exactly. The old teacher nodded approvingly. So instead of saying no directly, many people search for softer ways. The idea fascinated me, not because it was completely unfamiliar, but because it seemed so deeply woven into everyday life here. Back home, clarity often ranked above comfort. In Thailand, comfort sometimes ranked alongside clarity. The goal was not merely exchanging information, the goal was preserving harmony. That morning, I began noticing examples everywhere. The market provided plenty. A customer asked a vendor whether she could lower the price. The vendor smiled. A little difficult. Not no, a little difficult. The customer laughed. The conversation continued warmly. No tension. No confrontation. Another customer asked whether a particular fruit was available. The vendor smiled apologetically. Maybe tomorrow. Again, not a direct refusal. Yet everyone understood. Nobody seemed confused. Nobody seemed frustrated. The communication flowed naturally, like water moving around stones in a stream. Later, Somchai and I walked through the market together. The scent of fresh herbs filled the air. Bundles of basil, mint, and coriander sat beside baskets of mangoes and bananas. The colors seemed almost unreal beneath the morning sunlight. As we passed a noodle stall, Somchai stopped. Let's have breakfast. I gladly agreed. The owner greeted him warmly. They exchanged a few words in Thai. Within minutes, steaming bowls appeared before us. The broth smelled wonderful, rich, and comforting. As we ate, I asked another question. Do Thai people ever say no directly? Somchai laughed. Of course. So it happens? Certainly. He took a sip of soup, but context matters. What do you mean? If something is dangerous, serious, or important, people may be direct. I nodded. That makes sense. The stereotype that Thai people never say no is not true. He pointed his spoon at me. The reality is more interesting. How so? We often consider how our words affect relationships. That sentence stayed with me. How our words affect relationships. Back home, I had often viewed communication as a transaction, a question, an answer, a problem, a solution. But here, communication seemed more like gardening. People carefully nurtured the emotional space between one another. Words were chosen not only for accuracy, but also for harmony. As the morning continued, Somchai shared stories from his years as a teacher. One story stood out. Many years earlier, he had taught a boy who struggled academically. The child worked hard, very hard, but his grades remained poor. One afternoon, the boy nervously approached him. "Teacher," the boy asked, "am I stupid?" The question hung in the air. Somchai smiled softly as he remembered. "What would you say?" he asked me. I thought for a moment. I suppose I would say no, and if the answer were complicated, I hesitated. Then I might explain. Somchai nodded. Exactly. The old teacher leaned back. The boy was not stupid, but he struggled in certain subjects. I nodded. So what did you tell him? The teacher smiled. I told him everyone learns differently. I smiled. That was kind. It was also true. He looked toward the rice fields, but it protected his dignity. The conversation drifted into silence. The more examples I heard, the more I realized that saving face was not about deception. It was about compassion. Not perfect compassion, not always successful, but compassion nonetheless. The desire to reduce unnecessary hurt, to preserve mutual respect, to maintain social balance. Around midday, the heat began to build. The market grew quieter. Many villagers returned home. Somchai invited me to visit a nearby temple. We walked along a narrow road lined with trees. Cicadas buzzed loudly from the branches above. Sunlight flickered across the path. Soon, the golden roof of the temple appeared between the trees. The grounds were peaceful, almost silent. A few monks moved quietly between buildings. Wind chimes tinkled softly in the breeze. The atmosphere encouraged reflection. We sat beneath a large tree overlooking the temple courtyard. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, Somchai broke the silence. May I tell you another story? Please. His eyes softened. This happened many years ago. A young man from the village had fallen in love. The entire village knew it. Everyone expected him to propose. One evening, he gathered his courage and approached the young woman. He asked whether she wanted to marry him. I smiled. What happened? Somchai chuckled. She did not say no. She didn't? No. What did she say? The old teacher laughed. She said she needed time to think. I laughed too. And did she? No. We both smiled. The answer was already obvious. The young woman wanted to decline, but she wished to do so gently, without humiliation, without public embarrassment, without causing unnecessary pain. Again, the goal was not avoiding truth forever. The goal was delivering truth with care. The distinction felt increasingly important. As afternoon became evening, the sky gradually turned golden. Shadows stretched across the fields. Birds crossed the horizon in small groups. The village began preparing for another quiet night. On the walk home, I found myself thinking about my own culture. How many times had I praised directness? How many times had I assumed direct communication was automatically superior? Perhaps every culture solves the same human challenges differently. How do we tell difficult truths? How do we refuse requests? How do we disagree? How do we protect relationships while remaining honest? There is no universal formula, only different approaches, different priorities, different values. That evening, I sat outside my room watching fireflies appear above the fields. Tiny lights floated through the darkness. The frogs began singing again. The air smelled faintly of jasmine. I opened my notebook. Under yesterday's question, I wrote, Thai people do not avoid no because they fear honesty. Often they avoid direct no because they value harmony. I paused. Then I added another line. Communication is not only about being understood. It is also about helping others feel respected. The fireflies drifted lazily through the night. The village settled into silence. And somewhere beyond the fields, a distant temple bell echoed softly through the darkness. Tomorrow, Somchai promised to explain another mystery, a word I had already heard hundreds of times, a word that foreigners often misunderstood, a word that sometimes sounded like agreement, but often meant something entirely different. That word was maybe, and understanding it would change everything. Chapter 3. The Hidden Meaning of Maybe. That night, rain arrived shortly after midnight. I woke briefly to the sound of water tapping against the wooden roof. Not a violent storm, not the dramatic thunderstorms that sometimes rolled across Bangkok. This was softer, steadier, the kind of rain that seemed to settle over the world like a blanket. Half asleep, I listened to it for a while. The frogs continued singing. The insects continued their endless nighttime orchestra. The village felt peaceful, protected somehow, far from urgency, far from deadlines, far from the constant need to have an answer immediately. I eventually drifted back to sleep, and when morning arrived, the world looked washed clean. The rice fields sparkled beneath the sunlight. Drops of water clung to leaves and fence posts. The mountains beyond the village appeared sharper than before, fresh, alive. The kind of morning that made you want to walk slowly and notice everything. I found Somchai sitting beneath the same tamarind tree near the school. Several children were helping sweep leaves from the yard. They chatted happily while they worked. Nobody appeared to be rushing. Nobody seemed stressed. The atmosphere felt almost impossibly calm. When Somchai saw me approaching, he smiled. "You are early." I couldn't stop thinking about yesterday. About saving face? Yes, he nodded knowingly. Many foreigners need time to understand that idea. I think I do. Somchai laughed softly. Today, we make things even more confusing. I sat beside him. How? We talk about maybe. I groaned dramatically. The old teacher laughed. You see? That word has caused me more confusion than anything else in Thailand. I know. For a few moments, we watched the children sweeping. Then Somchai asked, when someone says, maybe in England, what does it mean? I thought about it. It usually means uncertainty. Not sure? Exactly. He nodded. That is often true in Thailand too. I felt relieved. Good, but not always. The relief disappeared immediately. Somchai smiled mischievously. Of course. I laughed. You're enjoying this? Very much. The old teacher folded his hands. In Thailand, words sometimes carry meaning beneath the meaning. I raised an eyebrow. Meaning beneath the meaning? Yes. He pointed toward the mountains. If I tell you the mountain is beautiful, I am talking about the mountain. Obviously. But if I tell you this village is peaceful, perhaps I am also telling you something about what I value. I nodded. I understand. Language often works that way. The more we talked, the more I realized that Thai communication often depended on context, tone, relationship, situation. The actual words were only part of the message. Everything surrounding the words mattered too, a great deal. Somchai decided to give me an example. Imagine I invite you to sing at a village festival. I laughed. That would be a mistake. Exactly. He smiled. You cannot sing. Correct. So I asked, Daniel, will you sing for everyone tonight? He paused. What would you say? No. Directly? Immediately. The old teacher chuckled. Many Thai people might answer differently. How? He thought carefully. Maybe. I laughed. There it is again. Or perhaps. He adopted a thoughtful expression. It might be difficult. That means no? Possibly. I groaned again. Somchai laughed loudly. For one of the few times since meeting him, he laughed so hard that tears appeared in his eyes. You see why foreigners struggle? Very much. After a moment, he became serious again. The important thing is this. He pointed gently toward me. Thai people often expect listeners to understand context. The sentence stayed with me. Understand context. In many Western cultures, speakers often carry most of the responsibility. The speaker is expected to be clear, direct, precise. In Thailand, listeners often share more responsibility. People are expected to read situations, observe emotions, notice subtle clues. Meaning is created together, not delivered like a package. As the morning continued, I began seeing examples everywhere. A neighbor asked another neighbor whether he could help repair a fence that afternoon. The man smiled apologetically. Oh, maybe. His voice sounded hesitant. The answer was technically uncertain, but everyone seemed to understand. The neighbor immediately asked someone else. No disappointment, no confusion, no further discussion. The message had been received. A little later, I visited a small shop near the market. An elderly woman ran the store. She sold snacks, drinks, soap, batteries, and dozens of other small items. A customer entered and asked for a specific brand of tea. The woman smiled. Not today. The customer nodded. No frustration. No complaint. No demand for explanation. The exchange lasted only seconds. Yet it felt incredibly smooth. The customer understood immediately. There was no need for bluntness. No need for emphasis. The communication flowed effortlessly because both people understood the cultural rhythm. By lunchtime, Somchai and I were eating beneath a shaded pavilion beside the school. The air had become warm. Children's voices drifted from nearby classrooms. The scent of jasmine floated through the breeze. I had another question. If everyone speaks indirectly, Doesn't it sometimes create misunderstandings? Somchai nodded immediately. Of course. That surprised me. You admit that? Why wouldn't I? He smiled. Every communication style has strengths and weaknesses. I appreciated that answer. Many people defend their own culture as perfect. Somchai never did. He seemed genuinely interested in understanding differences, not proving superiority. He continued. Direct cultures sometimes hurt feelings. I nodded. Indirect cultures sometimes create confusion. I nodded again. Neither system is perfect. The simplicity of that observation felt refreshing. No culture wins. No culture loses. People simply develop different tools for living together. The afternoon passed quietly. Clouds gathered over the mountains. Shadows moved slowly across the fields. A gentle wind rustled the rice plants. Everything seemed peaceful. Then, something happened that taught me more than hours of discussion. A young foreign volunteer had recently arrived in the village. His name was Michael. He came from Australia, friendly, energetic, very direct. In many ways, he reminded me of myself when I first arrived in Thailand. That afternoon, he approached a local organizer about a community event. I need 10 volunteers for tomorrow, Michael said. The organizer smiled politely. Maybe. Michael nodded confidently. Great. The organizer continued smiling. The next day, only 3 volunteers arrived. Michael looked shocked. Later that evening, he complained to me. He said yes. I smiled. No. What do you mean no? He said maybe. Michael frowned. Same thing. I laughed. Not here. For the first time, I realized how often foreigners accidentally translated Thai communication through their own cultural assumptions. We heard the words, but not the meaning. We listened, but we did not truly understand. The organizer had never promised 10 volunteers. He had never guaranteed anything. He had simply responded in a polite and socially comfortable way. Michael interpreted the conversation through Australian expectations. The organizer communicated through Thai expectations. Neither person was wrong. They were simply operating inside different cultural maps. That evening, I shared the story with Somchai. He nodded knowingly, very common. So, how should foreigners interpret maybe? The old teacher smiled. Carefully, I laughed. That's not helpful. It is completely helpful. He grinned. Then he continued. You must listen to tone. Okay. You must observe body language. Okay. You must understand the relationship. Okay. You must consider the situation. I sighed dramatically. That's a lot of work. It is. He laughed. But it becomes easier. As darkness slowly settled across the village, we sat quietly watching the sunset. The sky glowed orange and gold. Birds returned to their nests. Smoke rose from kitchen fires. The evening felt calm, unhurried, beautiful. After a long silence, Somchai spoke again. When foreigners first arrive in Thailand, they often think communication is unclear. I nodded. I did. But later, many discover something surprising. What? He looked toward the fading horizon. The words may be less direct. He paused. But the intentions are often very clear. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The statement echoed in my mind. The words may be less direct, but the intentions are often very clear. Perhaps that was the heart of the lesson. Thai communication was not designed to maximize efficiency. It was designed to maintain relationships, to preserve harmony, to reduce unnecessary friction, to help people coexist peacefully. And once you understood that purpose, many mysteries began to disappear. The village lights gradually appeared one by one. Crickets began their nightly songs. The sky deepened into darkness. I returned to my room carrying my notebook. Before sleeping, I wrote one final observation. Maybe does not always mean uncertainty. Sometimes it means kindness. Sometimes it means hesitation. Sometimes it means no, and understanding which one requires listening beyond words. Outside, the wind moved gently through the rice fields. The frogs sang beneath the stars. And tomorrow, Somchai promised to explain something even more surprising, a concept hidden deep within Thai culture, a concept called Kreng Jai. a feeling so uniquely Thai that no single English word could fully translate it. And according to Somchai, if I wanted to understand why Thai people rarely say no directly, I would need to understand Kreng Jai first. Chapter 4. Kreng Jai, the invisible heart of Thai communication. The next morning arrived wrapped in mist. When I opened my window, the rice fields beyond the village seemed to float beneath a thin blanket of white cloud. The mountains had almost disappeared. Only their outlines remained, soft shadows rising from the earth. The air felt cool, fresh, quiet. Somewhere nearby, a rooster announced the beginning of another day. I stood for a moment and listened. There was something about mornings in northern Thailand that felt different from anywhere else I had traveled. Nothing demanded immediate attention. The world seemed content to wake slowly, patiently, as though time itself moved at a gentler pace here. After breakfast, I made my way toward the school. Children were already arriving. Some came by bicycle. Some walked with friends. Others rode on the back of motorcycles driven by parents or grandparents. Laughter filled the morning air. I found Somchai sitting beneath a familiar tamarind tree. He was feeding small pieces of bread to a pair of birds hopping near his feet. When he saw me, he smiled. Today is an important day. Because of Kreng Jai, he nodded. Because of Kreng Jai. Even the way he said the words sounded different. Respectful, almost careful. As though he were introducing me to an old friend. I sat beside him. So what exactly is Kreng Jai? The old teacher laughed. That is the difficult part. Why? Because there is no perfect English translation. I frowned. No translation at all? There are translations. He paused. But none of them are complete. The birds fluttered away. Children continued arriving at school. The village slowly awakened around us. Somchai folded his hands and thought for a moment. Some people describe Kreng Jai as consideration. I nodded. Okay. Others say it means being thoughtful. That sounds reasonable. Others call it respect. I waited, but none of those explanations are enough. The mystery deepened. So, what is it really? The old teacher smiled. Kreng Jai is when you care about how your actions affect another person. I considered that. That sounds simple. It sounds simple. He chuckled. But it reaches into many parts of Thai life. For several moments, he remained silent. Then he pointed toward a young student carrying a heavy box across the schoolyard. Immediately, two other children ran over to help. No teacher instructed them. No adult asked. They simply noticed and acted. Somchai watched them. That is one small example. I nodded. The children carried the box together and disappeared into a classroom. Kreng Jai often means not wanting to burden others. The sentence immediately caught my attention. Not wanting to burden others. The phrase sounded familiar because I had encountered it repeatedly since arriving in Thailand. Friends apologizing for small inconveniences, neighbors refusing assistance even when they needed it, people insisting they were fine despite obvious difficulties. At first, I had interpreted this behavior as politeness. Now, I wondered if something deeper was happening. Somchai continued. Imagine you are visiting someone's home. Okay, they offer you food. Normal. You are hungry. Very hungry. He laughed. But you know they do not have much food. I nodded. So what do? I thought carefully. I suppose I accept a little. Many Thai people might refuse first, even if they're hungry, especially if they are hungry. I stared at him. Why? The old teacher smiled gently. Because they do not want to create inconvenience. The concept fascinated me. Kreng Jai was not merely politeness. It was awareness. Awareness of other people's effort, other people's comfort, other people's feelings. And it seemed deeply connected to the communication styles I had been trying to understand. As the morning continued, Somchai shared story after story. Each one revealed another layer, another piece of the puzzle. One story involved a university student. The student needed help moving apartments. Several friends offered assistance. The student repeatedly declined. Eventually, the friends insisted. Only then did the student accept. Why didn't he accept immediately? I asked. Somchai smiled. Kreng Jai. He didn't want to trouble them. Exactly. The old teacher nodded. He knew helping would take time. He knew they had their own responsibilities. So he hesitated. I began seeing the pattern. In many Western cultures, accepting help can strengthen relationships. In Thailand, people certainly help one another too. But many individuals first think carefully about the burden they may create. The emphasis often falls on consideration, not entitlement, not expectation, consideration. Late that morning, we walked through the village together. Clouds drifted lazily across the sky. The market buzzed softly with activity. Vendors arranged vegetables. Children bought snacks. Motorcycles came and went. Everything felt wonderfully ordinary. Yet now I was noticing details I had previously overlooked. At a noodle stall, a customer accidentally dropped a spoon. Immediately, 3 people bent down to pick it up. Each person smiled. Nobody complained. Nobody rolled their eyes. Nobody acted inconvenienced. The interaction lasted only seconds, yet it reflected something larger. People seemed constantly aware of one another. Not perfectly, not always, but noticeably, that awareness shaped behavior. And language, especially language. As we continued walking, I asked another question. So, Kreng Jai affects communication? Somchai laughed. It affects almost everything. The answer did not surprise me. By now, I was beginning to understand that culture rarely exists in separate categories. Food influences family life. Family life influences communication. Communication influences relationships. Everything connects. Nothing stands alone. The older teacher stopped beside a small roadside shop. An elderly woman sat behind the counter. She greeted him warmly. We purchased cold drinks and sat beneath a nearby tree. The afternoon heat was beginning to build. The shade felt wonderful. As we drank, Somchai leaned back. Let me ask you something. Okay, if your boss asks you to work late. I nodded. But you already have plans. Right. What would you say? I thought for a moment. Probably no. Directly? Politely. But yes. Somchai smiled. Many Thai employees might hesitate. Because of Kreng Jai? Exactly. They worry about disappointing others. I nodded slowly. They worry about creating difficulty. The old teacher pointed toward me. And this is one reason foreigners sometimes misunderstand Thai communication. That caught my attention. How? He thought carefully. Foreigners sometimes hear uncertainty. I nodded, but the Thai speaker may be expressing consideration. The distinction felt important. Very important. A person saying maybe might not be confused. A person saying it might be difficult might not lack confidence. A person avoiding direct refusal might actually be trying to protect the relationship, not because they fear honesty, but because they value harmony. The afternoon passed peacefully. Children returned home from school. The market gradually quieted. A warm breeze moved across the rice fields. The village seemed to exhale. As evening approached, Somchai invited me to a community dinner. Several families had gathered beneath a large pavilion. Long tables were covered with food. Bowls of soup, grilled fish, vegetables, rice, fruit. Everything was shared. Everyone contributed something. The atmosphere felt welcoming, comfortable. I sat beside Somchai and simply observed. People constantly encouraged one another to eat, have more. Try this, take some. Yet many people politely declined before accepting, exactly as Somchai had described. A dance of generosity and humility. Offer, refuse, insist, accept. The pattern repeated throughout the evening. At first glance, it seemed unnecessary, but gradually I began recognizing its purpose. The ritual allowed both generosity and consideration to exist together. One person demonstrated kindness by offering. The other demonstrated consideration by hesitating. The exchange created balance. Neither side appeared selfish. Neither side appeared demanding. The relationship remained harmonious. As darkness settled across the village, lanterns illuminated the pavilion. Children chased one another across the grass. Adults laughed quietly. Someone played soft music in the background. The atmosphere felt warm, human, peaceful. At one point, a young man offered me another serving of food. Instinctively, I accepted immediately. Everyone laughed. Not cruelly, not mockingly, simply with amusement. Even I laughed, because I finally understood what I had missed. I had skipped the dance, skipped the ritual, skipped the subtle exchange of consideration. The young man smiled and handed me another plate. No Kreng Jai today? He teased. The table erupted in laughter. I grinned. Apparently not. Later that evening, after most people had gone home, Somchai and I sat beneath the stars. The village had grown quiet. Crickets filled the darkness with sound. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. The old teacher looked toward the sky. When foreigners first arrive in Thailand, he said softly, they often focus on what people say. I nodded, but understanding Thailand requires noticing what people are trying to protect. The sentence lingered between us. What people are trying to protect. Harmony, respect, dignity, relationships, feelings. Not perfectly, not every time, but often, very often. Suddenly, so many confusing conversations from my first weeks in Thailand began making sense. The indirect answers, the hesitant refusals, the gentle language, the word maybe, the phrase it might be difficult, all of them connected. All of them reflected deeper values, not weakness, not dishonesty, not indecision, but consideration, Kreng Jai, the invisible heart beating quietly beneath everyday interactions. That night, before sleeping, I opened my notebook once more. Under everything I had written previously, I added a new line. Sometimes Thai people avoid saying no directly, not because they fear conflict, but because they care about the relationship more than the efficiency of the answer. I stared at the sentence for a long time. Then I closed the notebook. Outside, the rice fields shimmered beneath moonlight. The frogs sang softly. The village rested peacefully beneath the stars. Tomorrow would be my final day with Somchai, and before I left, he promised to answer one final question. Perhaps the most important question of all. If Thai people value harmony so deeply, what happens when they truly need to say no? And the answer, he said, would finally reveal the real meaning behind everything I had learned. Chapter 5. The gentle know what Thai people really mean. My final morning in the village arrived quietly. The kind of morning that makes you wish time would slow down. A pale mist rested above the rice fields. The mountains stood silently in the distance. The air smelled of wet grass and wood smoke. Somewhere beyond the trees, a rooster announced the arrival of another day. I sat outside my small wooden room holding a cup of coffee. The village was beginning to wake. A motorcycle passed slowly along the road. A dog stretched lazily beneath a fence. Birds called to one another from the trees. Everything felt peaceful, familiar, and strangely comforting. Only a few weeks earlier, I had arrived here carrying a simple question. Why don't Thai people say no directly? Now, as I watched the morning sunlight spread across the fields, I realized the answer had become much larger than the question itself. The question had never really been about a word. It had been about an entire way of seeing other people, an entire way of living together. And today, Somchai promised to help me understand the final piece. The piece that connected everything. Saving face, harmony, maybe, Kreng Jai, all of it. I found him beneath the tamarind tree shortly after sunrise. As always, he seemed completely at peace. Children were arriving at school. Teachers greeted one another. The village moved through its morning routine. Nothing dramatic, nothing extraordinary, just ordinary life. And perhaps that was exactly where culture revealed itself most clearly. Not during ceremonies, not during festivals, but during ordinary moments. The moments people rarely notice. Good morning, Daniel. Good morning. I sat beside him. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The silence felt comfortable. Then Somchai smiled. You are leaving tomorrow. I am. And have you found your answer? I considered the question carefully. Partly. He nodded. Then today we finished the story. The old teacher looked toward the schoolyard. A group of children were laughing together near a classroom. One of them accidentally dropped a stack of books. Immediately, the others rushed to help. Within seconds, everything was fine again. The teacher smiled. Tell me something. Okay. What do you think now when a Thai person says maybe? I laughed. It depends. Good. When someone says it might be difficult, it may mean no. He laughed. Excellent. And when someone avoids refusing directly, what do you think? I looked out toward the rice fields. The answer came more easily than I expected. They may be protecting the relationship. Somchai nodded approvingly. The lesson was finally beginning to settle inside me. Not merely as information, but as understanding. The difference mattered. Because information tells you what people do. Understanding helps you see why. And why is often far more important. The old teacher folded his hands. Now, let me tell you the final part. I listened carefully. In Thailand, harmony is often considered a shared responsibility. I nodded. We try not to create unnecessary tension. He paused. We try not to embarrass others. Another pause. And we try not to embarrass ourselves. The idea sounded familiar now. Not foreign, not confusing, simply different. A different cultural solution to the same human challenge. How do people live together peacefully? Every society answers that question in its own way. Thailand had chosen one path. My own culture had chosen another. Neither was perfect. Neither was wrong. Just different. The morning passed slowly. Somchai and I walked through the village one final time. Everywhere I looked, I noticed small examples of what he had been teaching me. A shopkeeper greeting customers warmly. Neighbors helping one another carry supplies. Children sharing snacks. People speaking gently, smiling often, paying attention to one another. The communication style that had once confused me now felt remarkably logical. Not because it always produced perfect clarity, but because it often preserved something equally valuable: connection. At midday, we stopped beneath a large mango tree overlooking the rice fields. The sky was brilliantly blue. Clouds drifted lazily overhead. The fields swayed softly in the breeze. The scene looked almost timeless, as though it had existed exactly this way for generations. I opened my notebook, the same notebook where I had first written my question weeks earlier. The pages were now filled with observations, conversations, stories, lessons. I flipped back to the beginning. There it was, written in slightly faded ink. Why don't Thai people say no? I smiled. Then I showed the page to Somchai. He laughed immediately. Such a small question. Not anymore. No, he smiled. Not anymore. For several moments, we sat quietly. Then I asked something that had been lingering in my mind. So what happens when a Thai person really must say no? The old teacher nodded. A good question. He looked toward the horizon. The answer is simple. I waited. They do. I blinked. That's it? That's it. We both laughed. Thai people absolutely say no when necessary. He continued. They refuse. They disagree. They set boundaries. They express opinions. They stand up for themselves. The list continued. And suddenly I realized something important. The stereotype itself was flawed. Thai people did not avoid no. They simply often delivered it differently, more gently, more indirectly, more carefully. The no still existed. The refusal still existed. The disagreement still existed. Only the packaging changed. The heart of the message remained. And once you learned to hear it, communication became much easier. The afternoon slowly faded into evening. Golden sunlight stretched across the fields. Birds crossed the sky. The village prepared for another peaceful night. That evening, several villagers gathered for a farewell dinner. The atmosphere felt warm and relaxed. Food covered the tables. Children played nearby. Laughter drifted through the air. As we ate, people shared stories. Some funny, some thoughtful, some embarrassing. Many of them involved misunderstandings between foreigners and Thai people. Everyone seemed to enjoy the topic. One woman told a story about a tourist who asked whether a mountain hike was easy. The local guide had replied, "A little difficult." The tourist assumed that meant moderately challenging. Several hours later, he found himself climbing an extremely steep mountain. The entire table laughed. Another villager shared a story about a foreign volunteer who interpreted every maybe as a yes. The laughter grew even louder. I laughed too, because by now I recognized my former self in those stories. The eager foreigner, the confused listener, the person trying to understand a culture using only his own assumptions. We all do it, not just in Thailand, everywhere. Human beings naturally interpret unfamiliar experiences through familiar frameworks. The challenge is learning when those frameworks no longer fit. As darkness settled across the village, the dinner gradually came to an end. Families returned home. Children grew sleepy. The stars appeared above the rice fields. Soon, only Somchai and I remained. The old teacher sat quietly for a while. Then he spoke. When you return home, people will ask what you learned in Thailand. I nodded. They will. What will you tell them? The question lingered in the cool evening air. I thought carefully before answering. Finally, I smiled. I'll tell them I was asking the wrong question. Somchai looked pleased. Go on. I stared toward the dark fields beyond the village. The frogs had begun their nightly chorus. A soft breeze moved through the trees. The entire world seemed peaceful. And then I said, I came to Thailand wondering why people didn't say no. I paused, but eventually I learned they were trying to say something else. The old teacher smiled. What? I thought about every conversation, every story, every lesson, every quiet moment beneath the tamarind tree. Then I answered. They were saying, I respect you. They were saying, I don't want to hurt you. They were saying, I care about this relationship. They were saying, let us stay in harmony. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The silence itself felt like agreement. Finally, Somchai nodded. Now you understand. The stars shone brightly above us. The village slept peacefully beneath the night sky. And for the first time since arriving in Thailand, I felt that I truly understood something important. Not everything. No traveler ever understands everything, but something meaningful, something real. I had arrived believing communication was primarily about accuracy, about delivering information efficiently. Thailand had taught me another possibility. Communication can also be an act of care, an act of consideration, an act of relationship building. Words are important, but so are feelings, so are connections, so are the invisible threads that bind people together. As I walked back to my room for the final time, the village seemed quieter than ever. Moonlight shimmered across the rice fields. The mountains rested peacefully beneath the stars. The frogs continued singing. The wind moved softly through the grass. Everything felt calm, gentle, unhurried. Before sleeping, I opened my notebook one final time. Beneath my original question, I wrote my final answer. Why don't Thai people say no directly? Sometimes they do, but often they choose a gentler path. Not because they fear honesty, not because they lack confidence, not because they are unsure, but because they value harmony, because they care about relationships, because they understand that words can heal as easily as they can hurt. I closed the notebook. The village was silent now. Only the distant sound of insects remained. Tomorrow I would leave, but the lesson would stay with me. And perhaps that is the true gift of travel. Not the places we visit, not the photographs we take, not even the stories we tell afterward. The true gift is discovering that other people can see the world differently, and realizing that their way may contain wisdom we never expected. The night deepened. The stars drifted slowly overhead. The rice fields shimmered beneath moonlight. And somewhere in the peaceful darkness of northern Thailand, a small village slept quietly beneath the endless sky. A place where people sometimes say maybe. A place where no can sound surprisingly gentle. A place where relationships often matter more than perfect clarity. And a place that taught one foreign traveler that understanding another culture begins not with speaking, but with listening very carefully. Good night. The end. Cultural insights discovered in this story. Saving face. Many Thai people try to avoid embarrassing others or themselves in social interactions. Kreng Jai, Kreng Jai. A uniquely Thai value centered on consideration, respect, and not wanting to burden others. Indirect communication words like maybe, we'll see, or it might be difficult often carry deeper meanings shaped by context and relationships. Thailand still holds countless stories waiting to be discovered. If you would like to continue this journey together, I hope to see you again in the next story from Thailand Through Eyes. And if there is somewhere in Thailand you wish to visit through story, leave your suggestion below. Perhaps our next journey will begin there.